Welcome and welcome back, everybody. The Okay Grognard Network's first Periodicals Friday show. Today is July 10th, 2026 in beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And we're going to look at, why not? It's the first periodical show. We'll look at the first Dragon magazine. Talk about what they talked about, which was how now and what now. Basically, Tim Kask, editor, they of course had been doing some great work with the strategic review for some period of time, 5 volume 1 copies and then issues, and then 2 volume 2 issues. But that was January 1975 on through early 1976. I think April, the Strategic Review, issue 2, volume 2, issue 2, was released. And then they did 4 more, but they did them in-house. They used it as an in-house magazine because they got the Dragon ready to go for June in 1976. So basically, 50 years ago, last month, just weeks ago, 50 years ago, got to see the Dragon Volume 1, Number 1. Hard to read on the cover there, but there was a Fritz Leiber, a conversation with Fafhrd and the Mouser article. There were languages in D&D, an article by Lee Gold, very famous for the Amateur Press Association, biggest alarums and excursions zine, which ran for years and years and years, like the first big supporting fanzine for Dungeons and Dragons. And then part 1 of a new fantasy novel, The Gnome Cache, which was a under a pseudonym of Gary Gygax writing. $1.50 for the first issue. Good luck getting it for that today. Dragon Rumbles was the article that was the editor's article from Tim Kask. Notice that name at the bottom, editor Tim Kask, artist Dave Sutherland, cover Bill Hannon, and June 1976. I blew this one up a little bit because Dragon Rumbles, or how did we get into this and what are we going to do now that we're here? So that's what we're going to look at, and we're going to look at it with some scrutiny. Let's go through it. The issue marks a major step for TSR Hobbies Incorporated. With it, we have bid farewell to the safe and secure world of the house organ, which is what he is saying was the case with the Strategic Review, and have entered the arena of competitive magazine publishing. We have activated a new division of the corporation, TSR Periodicals. We are soliciting advertisers and giving notice to the rest of the pack that we have arrived with a vengeance, with a mission to fulfill. And what does he say? He says that mission is to publish the best magazine devoted to sword and sorcery, fantasy, science fiction, and role-playing gaming. Now notice we get 2 words, role-playing, and it's not role-playing games, but it's swords and sorcery gaming, fantasy gaming, science fiction gaming, and role-playing gaming. But also sword and sorcery, fantasy, and science fiction, and role-playing gaming. And I think actually both become what the magazine does. We'll talk about that some more. It is a newly developed field, and we admit to being only as old as the following. That the following being the people who follow this field. That is, the people that have jumped on board and are early adopters of Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games that were starting to come out. He continues, however, we feel that our experience gained from publishing the Strategic Review, the pioneer in the field, will stand us in good stead. But we also make allowance for the fact that as the field grows and expands, demands and needs will change. We actively encourage your suggestions, criticisms, or whatever. Tim loves to say or whatever, just to make sure he's not missing anything. He says, we can adequately serve you, the gamer/reader, only if you let us know what you like and want. He continues, we plan to include gaming, variants, discussion, fiction by authors both known and unknown, reviews of interest to our readers, and anything else there is a demand for. In the next issue, when we have figured out what we can afford, we will publish our rates for articles and art. Submissions must be typed, double-spaced, and accompanied by a self-address stamped envelope. That is a way of getting your materials back, whether they use them or not, if they're originals that you want back. And he continues, failure to include a self-addressed stamped envelope precludes returning rejected or unused material. TSR periodicals in no event guarantees return of any submission unless by previous arrangement. Art must be pen and ink unless special arrangement is made for color. We will accept copies of art for inspection, provided the ubiquitous self-addressed stamped envelope is enclosed. We fully sympathize with any artist hesitant about entrusting originals to the U.S. mails. If deemed useful, we will inform you to then send the originals and recommend using registered mail. Anyone wishing to sound off on any topic of interest to our readers is invited to write out on a limb. We reserve the right to select and edit any submission, and the editor reserves the right to make any comments immediately following the letter. We will also answer when possible rules or interpretive questions as well as letters to the editor. Well, that's what he says. That's what he's talking about. That's how he starts everything rolling there. He's really jumped right in, and they're going to cover a lot. And he's interested in having all sorts of things in this magazine. Remember, Strategic Review, he said, was a house organ. I think there was more in there than just TSR-related materials. But nevertheless, it really was written mainly for TSR. I'll tell you what we're going to do. Let's have a look inside a little bit, because we're only 10 minutes in. We have some time. I've got a copy here, and we'll just kind of, what do we want? We want our lovely hand. Right on the inside cover, or rather page 2, is the Battle of Five Armies. Larry Smith. Now, this was originally published under the auspices of Lore and JMJ Enterprises, if I'm recalling correctly. And it was published as a bag game. A game that you would get in like a freezer bag. Basically a large Ziploc bag that would include a board, map, usually paper, folded up, and some chits, cardboard if you were lucky, but often needed to cut them out from a piece of paper, separate them into little 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch, sometimes 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch units, game units. They represented the game pieces. And then there would be rules. And that would be a war game if it was done on the cheap. And it was originally. And then it was republished by TSR Hobbies Incorporated, but again as a bag game in its second rendition. And then it was published as a board game. But this is Tolkien. And according to so many people, Gary hated Tolkien. Why is TSR Hobbies publishing? Well, he didn't hate Tolkien. And this is such evidence of that. And all the inclusions in original D&D of hobbits and balrogs and various other references to Tolkien as things. Of course, in Dungeons and Dragons, there's just a little splash here and there. Battle of Five Armies, this whole game is based on Tolkien IP. Tolkien Enterprises, and I believe the Tolkien estate, was it Elan merchandising? Merchandise? Something like that. And the Tolkien estate, they had Tolkien estate's interests when they eventually sent a cease and desist letter after a boxed version of this game, the third rendition of it, came out. And that letter also included, hey, take the references from what you published in 1974 out of D&D. And they tried to do that. And if you look at some later copies, later printings of Dungeons and Dragons original edition, you will see that they very much missed quite a few. But Battle of Five Armies tells you right there everything you need to know about what TSR thought of pardon me, there's a large truck going past, and that gets me past the Dragon Rumbles in any event. There is that Fritz Leiber offered in the Grey Mousers say their say. So this was a nice little story, continues later on, but here's the first page of it. In the Cauldron, now there's a Tim Kask further editorial. So let's bigify that, and we'll have a look at what that says, because I think it's important. This column, because he's introducing it, is going to undergo a rather extensive facelift in order to get away from the house organ syndrome. The contents must change. From now on, it becomes my own domain in which I get to talk about nearly anything, so long as it's not TSR-oriented. When something appears within this column, it is my statement or opinion and not that of TSR. Let me emphasize this point so that everyone has that clear. If you disagree with something that appears here, don't hold the publisher, TSR Hobbies Incorporated, liable. When you have a comment, criticism, or whatever, whether it concerns this column or anything else within these pages, please feel free to write to Out on a Limb. That is the express purpose of that column. If something is marked as an editorial, then you can hold the magazine or the company liable. Otherwise, address all lawsuits to me. I love that he put spaces between the dots of his ellipsis. So that's an important thing. So we got a continuation over here of the Mosier and Fawford, Gray Mosier. Up here, proposal for a piece of a word about Cytec 76. Surprised we read in attendance that Gary Gygax will be doing D&D. We're further amazed that you see the lion's share of games advertised to be played were TSR games. This was the first we knew of any of this. For the record, we have no intention whatsoever of being at Cytex. We disavow any connection with the event. Do not be misled. Cytex 76 is making false promises. And a passing note, we were also rather skeptical of their claim that they were hosting DipCon. We thought it was to be in Baltimore. So there you go, a little back and forth. DipCon, probably a diplomacy convention, right? And don't forget, a little advertisement here for Diplomacy World, which is the quarterly magazine on diplomacy, which is edited by Walter Buchanan. He's in Lebanon, Indiana. The purpose of each 40-page offset issue is to present a broad overview of the postal diplomacy hobby by printing articles on Good Play, carrying the Hoosier Archives demonstration game with expert analysis. So, play-by-mail games, where you would write out your turn, send it by mail to a referee, or, if there was no referee needed, to your opponent. They would then keep track of what was happening in game based off of your move, create their move, send it forth, back and forth with the mail. Lots of stamps, lots of writing, lots of turns changing hands. Very nice. Have you heard about Little Wars? Well, Little Wars is, of course, the magazine that was the war game arm of TSR magazine, and it will be a separate magazine eventually, but then will become a section in the Dragon when it doesn't stand on its own 2 feet, but it also, why not? People have cross interests, and it's good for people to know what's going on in both hobbies. And look at that, the Battle of Five Armies in miniature. So this article, Larry Smith, who wrote the original war game, it was then picked up by TSR and published by them, he suggests a way of taking the Battle of Five Armies and making it into a miniatures war game. Rules used for this battle are modified from the chainmail rules by Gary Gygax. The modifications will be listed at the end of this article, and he goes on to go through every detail, converting the board, order of battle, based off of the chainmail rules. It tells you all about the various units and gets into it. Hey, the first comic strip for a Dragon magazine, Dirt by Jake. And what does it say? Well, Omar, what did you think of the trip from Strategic Review to the Dragon? It was a moving experience. Oh, good, a pun. Some old dungeon. Same old dungeon, though. Same walls, same ceiling, same rats, same bugs. But, by the way, did you remember to bring it, in quotes? I've got it right here. Next issue, it. Well, we'll have to check that out. How to use non-prime requisite character attributes. We went through this article and discussed a great deal of it when we were looking at our ability score checks and going through well, going backwards through from when it was explicitly mentioned in the Rules Cyclopedia, backwards in time through all the places where it was mentioned, where it was kind of mentioned, where it was explicitly mentioned for specific attributes in a few spells in the Player's Handbook in first edition. And then we even found an article with from the Blackmore bunch where they talk about using it for resolving issues that weren't covered by the rules. So there you go. This article has already been looked at in another place, so I won't continue there. But let's look at this. James Ward, first issue of The Dragon. He's got an article, Magic and Science, Are They Compatible in D&D? And you know, the guy who wrote Metamorphosis Alpha and Gamma World should know a little something about science in RPGs. And I think he does. So there's a good article, and he shows how some of it crosses over and can be thought of in science. Continue to page 10. Not all of those are correct, by the way. We'll point that out when it becomes necessary. Languages, or could you repeat that in Old Wormish? By Lee Gold, editor of Alarms and Excursions, the D&D Amateur Press Association, APA zine. So Lee talks about languages and gets pretty deep into the subject. PJ did a nice little drawing there. Continued on the overleaf. There it continues. Common Tongue. There's a Gen Con update. Wargaming World. Summer is upon us, and with the weather comes convention fever. Game addicts have a number of fixes available to choose from. Look at that. Now, that might have been just barely under the wire. Cal State. We've got Lincoln Park, Michigan. We've got Conshohocken, Pennsylvania. We've got Gahanna, Ohio. There's Origins happening in Baltimore, Maryland. Origins used to move around a lot of places. Look, this is just Origins 2 in 1976 in July, late July. So 75 was the first Origins. Gahanna Con. Are we back in Gahanna? Looks like it. Another convention in Pennsylvania. No, yeah. And Siegler. There we go. And, of course, Gen Con in August. Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Contact Gary Gygax. 330 Center Street. Although much of this magazine, when they suggest sending something in, will send it to the P.O. Box in Lake Geneva 756. Is that what it is? He's still taking mail at his home address, which is interesting. There you go. Gen Con update gets to talk about that. This year's Gen Con promises to be the biggest and best ever, with over $450 in prizes, not to mention numerous trophies, ribbons, plaques, cups, etc. The slate contains no less than 44 tournaments and seminars, running the gamut of board games, miniatures, and role-playing games. There you go. And with the hyphen, role-playing. So the conventions are not set yet on how they're going to be referring to Dungeons & Dragons and other role-playing games. This is the second iteration that we've seen of how they express it. The Mammoth D&D Miniatures game is covered elsewhere in this issue. That's a Len Lakofka set of rules, I believe. We'll get there in just a bit. But herewith is a listing of some of the more unusual events. At this year's convention, the Fight in the Skies Society will hold its semi-annual Masters game. And remember, this is Gen Con 9 coming up for 76, right? This game, open by invitation only, pits the finest FITS players in the nation against each other in a single 10-player game. At stake for the winner is an engraved silver cup, reminiscent of the engraved cups awarded to German pilots in World War I. For those with the racing spirit in their blood, Saturday evening will feature a giant 4 hours of Le Mans simulation. This large-scale race will be an enlarged and expanded version of Avalon Hill's classic Le Mans game. The game will run approximately 4 hours as an endurance test, just as the actual Le Mans race runs a full 24 hours. Up to 18 cars may compete, and if there is sufficient interest, it is envisioned that up to 36 players may take part, 2 per racing team. This will allow driver changes just as in real life in order to create as much of the actual feel of the event as possible. In addition, there will be special rules for such other aspects as mechanical trouble, driver skills, and more. Organizer and judge for the game is Mike Carr. He'll climb up on the table and run that game for sure. There will be seminars by Fritz Leiber on Sword and Sorcery and by M.A.R. Barker on Empire of the Petal Throne, Takumel, as well as a D&D seminar by Gygax, Arneson, and Kuntz. There will also be competition for the best organized integral unit of miniatures to be judged by Gene McCoy, editor of Wargames Digest. Anyone wishing a full list of events, times, prizes, etc. should write to Gary Gygax, and he puts in his home address again there. The program will also contain a listing of lodgings and restaurants, etc., obviously in Lake Geneva and Lake Geneva area. There's a continuation here. Oh, by the way, August 2021 and 22. Notice Gen Con. Only 3 days. Not up to 4 days yet. 1976. It wasn't that long before when it was just 2 days. Just Saturday and Sunday. So they are growing it. Magic and Science. That's the Jim Ward article. That continues there. And then we've got The Search for the Forbidden Chamber. Jake Jacquet. Stone, roughly hewn and mortared by some long-forgotten hand, forms a wall. Another wall, possibly fashioned by the same hand, follows parallel, barely a shoulder's width away. A low ceiling bears down from above. Underfoot, a loathsome slime collects in nauseous pools. Nice little bit of fiction. And Mocking Ecology Now. Hell's Bells, it's a Recyclosaurus. It's Greyhawk Construction Company. He's smoking himself some pipeweed there, it would appear. But the others are afraid of the Recyclosaurus. So watch out for him. He's chewing up a tree frog beer. Delicious. Yes, even in 1976 they were mocking people that cared about the environment. But there you go. And we got more of the fiction continuing there. And we get down to, we're getting close to halfway through. Maybe we will do the rest of this next week and cut this off at half. I think that's the way to go. This announces a 64-man tournament. Len Lacaffa rules. Len Lacaffa's fantasy miniature rules, and they are in here too. And we will get to that. We will indeed get to that next time in a part 2 on this first issue Dragon overview and discussion. I think that's pretty interesting, and that's enough for now. Hey, shows are recorded on Twitch most Sundays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and then uploaded to YouTube for convenient streaming. Please like, subscribe, follow, and do all of that fun stuff for me. And don't forget Thank you to all who watch and support my efforts. Please back the channel, even at the free level on Patreon, and join all these other wonderful people that are on this list here. It's very much appreciated, and thank you to everyone on there. It's been the OK Grognard Network. We were looking at a Periodicals Friday show. We'll be back on Sunday talking about guidelines with the first guidelines show. Thank you so much, and bye-bye.